Mo Pitney, welcome to the show, man. I'm so excited to have you.
I am very glad to be here. I've been encouraged by your channel, so thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So, Mo, I'm a fan. I love your voice specifically. So, full disclosure, I am not necessarily the biggest country music fan. However,
Okay.
no, honestly. So, I love your voice. And so, I have fallen in love with different music genres that I hadn't been a fan of in the past because
Right.
someone's voice kind of hooks you in and then you go deep, right? You end up going to kind of the rabbit hole of
Right.
music.
Right.
Jazz was that way for me. Like I used to
Yeah.
hate jazz, and now I love jazz because of certain singers that have really
Right.
kind of taken me down that rabbit hole. And one of the reasons I wasn't a big country fan for the last few years is because, as my country music fan friends have told me, country music has turned into pop music. And then you come along and people are like, oh, Mo is the return of country music. He is the standard bearer for what country music is supposed to be. And I heard one guy say, you are the guy who believes in God and George Strait. That makes you the country music guy. So how do you feel being the new standard bearer for what country music is supposed to be?
Well, I take that with a lot of thankfulness and respect, but I try to hold the position of just being a guy that really believes in something. I really believe in good music that comes from the heart, something that's honest and true. And I think I would argue the reason why you fell in love with jazz via a few singers is that those few singers were the embodiment of jazz music. And what you were falling in love with was a person that was being completely honest with themselves in their expression of music. And I want to be that in whatever position God gives me in country music, because that's just what I grew up loving. There's other influences out and around country or traditional country music that I let into my music because that's also a part of who I am. But I think people really recognize that the core foundation that I'm standing on would be a more traditional look at country music, or at least building from that foundation.
No, I mean, that's beautifully well said. So thank you. And your comment about the jazz artists that I originally fell in love with that sort of brought me in. I mean, you're spot on, right? Nina Simone, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, right? So you talk
Right.
about pure and raw and beautiful, but very sort of naked in the sort of emotional content to it. And when I listened to some of your music, I was like, oh, this sounds like that in a lot of ways, right?
Honest. Hopefully,
Yes.
honesty. Right.
Right.
Good. Well, that's the biggest compliment I think any artist, music or painter or sculptor or anything, that people sense that their art is not polluted by the culture around it, but it's just something birthed out of the way God created that person, and it's honest. And I think that's what real art is.
Agreed. So, okay, we got a little off track on the normal format of the show, but I had to like launch into that. So
well, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Give our listeners one or two bullet points for sort of what you're known for, right?
Yeah. So my name is Mo Pitney. Obviously, you said that. I love country music, and it just so happened that doors opened up for me to move to Nashville. I have a record deal with Curb Records, and I've had 3 songs on country radio. One's called Country, one's called Boy and a Girl Thing, and the last one was called Everywhere. And it gave me the ability to kind of travel around and partially support my family by music. I guess fully support, but it's always an up and down battle. But I'm just so thankful to be able to travel and play music and do what I love.
Yeah, you're being very modest, by the way. Some of those songs hit top 10.
Huh.
So
I didn't remember that.
yeah, I'm sure you didn't. I'm sure you didn't. So it hit top 10 in country music, which is a huge accomplishment, right? So
Well,
for the few people who aren't aware of this, country music is actually the most popular music in the United States.
yeah.
More albums, more listens, more downloads, however you want to quantify it. The irony that country is more popular than pop. It's kind of funny to me.
That's crazy.
but hey, it's a big world out there. So all right.
Yeah.
So now you are on rocket fuel in terms of your career, right? You've
Right.
done something that most people dream about, which is
Hmm.
moving to Nashville, becoming a music star. You've got hits playing on the radio. That's amazing. But let's kind of get into you and your story a little bit. Let's
Yeah.
start at the beginning. Tell me about your parents. Tell me about where you grew up. Tell me about your background.
Well, I'll maybe start with my ancestors. Great grandparents moved up to Rockford, Illinois, on my mom's side from Arkansas, and on my dad's side from Missouri. They came up to find work in Rockford, which was a nuts and bolts town. And all my family started working in factories during the Depression, or coming out of the Depression, trying to find a better way, or just even any way for their family. But that connects to me in the way that all of them on both sides brought music, and their love for whether it's traditional bluegrass or Southern gospel music, or different strands of different kinds of music were just in my bloodstream there in Rockford. And people wonder how a guy like me up north falling in love with a more traditional branch of country music could happen. It's because it was transplanted from the South right before me, right? So hearing country music, gospel music. My grandparents traveled in a Southern gospel quartet, and we would sit around Christmas, just regular family gatherings, and would be singing a more Southern style of music. And then even closer to myself, my dad has been a lover of bluegrass and country music. My entire life, in my effort to impress my dad, the easiest way to do that would be to fall in love with country or bluegrass music, because it was so central to it. It just had his affections. And we drive down the road and you turn on Ray Price or Buddy Emmons playing the steel guitar, or J.D. Crowe playing the banjo, or whatever that is, and it literally made my dad's body move, his head move, and he would cry when he would listen to this style of music. And so I knew, if that music has my dad's affection that much, then it must be important. So I started studying it, learning it, picked up the guitar and picked up a Johnny Cash CD when I was young and learned it. And I tell people the first night that I really decided to sit down and learn the guitar, I had stayed up all night long and learned to play. And my dad woke up at 6 a.m. to go to work. He was a painter. He painted helicopters, buses, cars. He painted automobiles, and flying ones and rolling ones. And I was up all night and went upstairs when I heard him get up, and showed him all that I'd learned on the Johnny Cash CD.
Wow.
And you can find this theme of this effort to impress my dad, in this passionate drive to keep learning, until the bug just ultimately sparked in me, which I think is this gift that I've been handed from my ancestors. It's almost like we know what our ancestors were in love with. And then we feel alive when we feel connected to that thing. I definitely experienced that, and it's set me on a rather interesting trajectory, and I'm very thankful for it.
Man, that's beautiful. Number one, I couldn't agree more. Their connection to family, who we are, traditions. I'm going to make a little bit of a leap here, but I honestly
Yeah,
believe
yeah.
this. When you look at the amount of depression and suicide that we have in the United States, it's insane, right? It's a terrible,
Right.
terrible number. In
Right.
in particular, males, right?
Right.
Who have a suicide rate nearly 4 times higher than females. And
Mm.
one of the reasons I believe that is because we as Americans don't do enough of exactly what you're talking about. The sort of the
Huh.
history and the tradition passed down from our ancestors,
Mm.
and the culture that is there. If you look at other cultures
Mhm.
outside of America, right? So
Mhm.
Western
Mhm.
Europe, Asia, Africa, etc. Countries who have less money than America, even their suicide rates are fractions of ours. But they have
Huh.
that strong family connection. They have this beautiful culture that they sort of bite into, if you will. Or so it's really interesting because you've got wealthy countries and poor countries and everything I just listed, but you have an overwhelming culture, whether it's Spain, France, Nigeria, Japan, doesn't matter. There's all something there. Then you come to America and we've distanced ourselves. We've lost touch a little bit. And you see some of these interesting things that are sort of an unintended consequence of that. And then you go back to your roots and you go, hey, who is my grandparents? Who's my great grandparents? And what are they about? And you suddenly feel part of something bigger.
Yeah. Bigger than yourself.
Yes.
An extension of the story that you can either add positive or negative moments to, right?
Right.
So there's this added responsibility that comes from that, and and added joy and purpose too.
Yeah. So going back to you and staying up all night learning how to play guitar. I mean, my first thought was, weren't your fingers like just to the bone bleeding?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean,
Well, suffering, that's another,
yes.
I mean, you have a greater love. One thing that's really, I think, important to life is to have a greater love that's stronger than your desire not to suffer.
That's right.
Because if your largest fear is suffering, then we hide. I mean, we lock ourselves away, we isolate, and we never walk forward, because nothing has captured our affections more than this desire not to suffer.
Right.
And so that on a small scale, this idea of your fingers bleeding because you love playing guitar, that you love your dad and want to win his affections, you will suffer in order to achieve that goal.
Right. So what was the reaction from your dad when you were like, by the way, I can play the Johnny Cash album in
Well,
8 hours of learning?
Yeah, he definitely thought it was amazing. The cool thing about my dad, I've been around families whose parents have forced them to play music. And ironically, they bolt and stop playing music the second they get out from under their parents' shelter. But my dad never assumed that I would play music. It's just been around, the instruments have been laying around our house, and I took up my own curiosity to it and got my own high from it. And so I really surprised him when I started to do it, and then started to be able to learn really quickly. And he started to become more encouraging. And then I would ask him to teach me how to play things that I didn't know how to play, and he would do that. I will say he wasn't the greatest teacher, nor am I. I think that depending on how you were taught or how you learned, some people only know how to go pling, 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 pling. Hey, do that. I don't know how to show you how to do it, but I did it. Just watch really close. That's how I learned. And just do that. So that's the way he taught me, which was totally fine, because it actually taught me how to learn more than anything. It was kind of a teach a man to fish idea. Then I would go on YouTube and find my favorite guitar players and watch them play at real speed, and just watch them until I could figure out what they were doing.
And this was at the ripe old age of 12. Am I correct?
Yeah, I was playing drums at 12. I think I was 13 when I started playing guitar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's by anybody's standard, that's pretty young for such a complex instrument.
Yeah,
And
until you go to a bluegrass festival and you see the 9-year-old kids playing 3 times better than I can play now.
And they're picking on a bluegrass like faster than I can do. I like blink, right? So
Exactly.
those guys are just that's an incredible skill. But I digress. So it sounds like you came from a pretty stable family that was very musically inclined. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, definitely musically inclined. I mean, everyone has their struggles. There was definitely parts of my childhood that were more stable than others. In the same way, me being a father, my daughter's going to look up to me and make me aware of the things that I failed at. We all have those stories, and they shape us in certain ways and have an effect on our entire lives. But yeah, for the most part, especially in light of other stories that I know of, we have had a really, really stable life.
So then sort of express to me how high school went. So you're 13, you're now starting to play guitar. You're clearly picking it up at an exponential rate compared to most people. Does that make you cool in high school? Does that make you not cool in high school? Like how does high school work for you?
So I was actually, so early on, I went to a Christian school up until 6th grade, and then I was homeschooled. So you can add to the lack of cool factor by being a kid that loved guitar and bluegrass music and also was homeschooled. I mean, that was quite a few knocks against me in the early parts of my life.
I love it. Yeah. So meeting women is a little bit more difficult when you're in that situation. I got it.
Right. Except ironically, I meet my wife at a bluegrass festival. That's a story for I'm guessing about 15 minutes from now, but
yeah, that's about right. Yes.
But yeah, that's ironically, God had a plan there too for the dorky bluegrass loving kid.
So so you're in high school. At that point, you're 15, 16, 17. Kind of walk me through your mindset in terms of what were your dreams then? Not what your dreams are today, but what did you want to be when you were 15 and 16?
Okay. So alongside of music, my family was big into the outdoors, hunting and fishing. At 15 and 16, I liked country music, but only as much as it related to bluegrass music. And so we were traveling on the weekends playing bluegrass at bluegrass festivals at that point, which was like the greatest high I'd ever felt in my life. And so I had this interesting, kind of strangely patched worldview and idea for my life.
Yeah.
From then on, I didn't want to leave my hometown. I wanted to play bluegrass as much as I could, even if I had to play it for free. I didn't care. It didn't matter if I was going to take care of my family through music. I just had to play music because I loved it so much. My dad was a painter. I thought, well, I'll probably, receive this trade from my dad and keep painting cars and buying and selling cars, fixing things up. I was going to do a whole lot of different things, but I also had this dream of starting a pointing dog kennels. So I also raise and train. I still do. I don't sell them now, but I raise and train Brittany Spaniels for quail and pheasant hunting.
Sure.
And so my idea was going to be this mixture of make a little money playing bluegrass, painting cars throughout the week, and having this kennels set up at a little farmhouse in Rockford, Illinois, and sell and raise and train and help other people achieve their dream of having a good bird dog. And when I was 15 or 16, I thought all of that would somehow fit together. But I'm growing to realize that we just don't have all that much time in this world.
Yes, that is very, very true. And so when do you start to realize, or have you even started to realize, given the level of success you've had, it sounds like that music is your job. It is your career. It is your destiny. And before you answer that, I'll give you a moment to think about it. We've had a lot of amazing guests on this podcast. We've had authors, Navy SEALs, rappers, race car drivers, all kinds of amazing people. And the one thing that you just said is the same thing that all of them said, which is, I would have done it for free. I can't believe people pay me. Like they would have done all of those exact things for free because it was just in them. Like that's just it. And you're in that sort of rarefied air of being in the same place.
Well, to answer your question of when I figured it out, it wasn't until after. Honestly, it didn't actually occur to me. I always was kind of in this place of like, we're just kind of throwing it against the wall to see if it sticks. Even after I moved to Nashville and got a record deal, I was still, because my first record deal was a demonstration deal with Universal. So it wasn't set in stone that I had, the pathway to heaven, so to speak, laid before me. It was, I just got to try and see if this is going to work and if they're going to pick me up and take the next step. So even after moving to Nashville, I was kind of like, I love music and I hope that I can find my place here, but I just wasn't sure. And it wasn't until, I just noticed, well, we're getting likes and follows and things are happening and we're growing rather quickly that I thought I need to kind of lay my full weight into this one thing as central for taking care of my family. While, my biggest fear, which we can talk about now or in a second, was losing the purpose for why I started it, where I started. And I actually wrote a song, which is going to actually start out this next record. It's called A Music Man, and it actually explains the very thing that you're talking about, that I would have done it for free. And now I so happen to not be doing it for free. But I still want my foundation to be that original reason.
I've heard that as called the angle of wonder. And the angle of wonder is when you're a child, okay, you're low to the ground, you're little, and you look up at everything. So your angle is kind of pointed towards the sky and everything to you is amazing. Look, Daddy, at the pine tree. Look at the snow coming down, right? Look, everything, every building, every sign, everything's amazing when you're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. Your angle of wonder is pointed up. But as we grow and as we get older and we more mature, our angle starts to flatten out. It less and less impresses us, less and less inspires us. More things become sort of muted. We don't find wonder and happiness in simple things like beautiful snow falling on a pine tree branch. Like when you're 5, that's amazing and so much fun. And when you're 45, you're like, I got to shovel the car, right? Your perception of the exact same moment has completely changed. And there's an innocence that children have and an honesty that children have that we as adults should continue to aspire to have that angle of wonder. And that sounds like what you're talking about, which is this, wow, I get to be a country music singer. Like, that's so amazing. You're already signed. You already have top 10 hits. And you're like, wow, I can't wait for that day to happen someday, even though it's already happening to you. And there's a beauty and an honesty to that's what comes through in your voice.
It's amazing that a guy like, to your point, Jesus said, you'll by no means enter the kingdom of heaven unless you become like one of these little ones. Like, I believe that we taste heaven on earth when we have eyes to see the world like a child, because what is heaven other than full hope, joy, and satisfaction? And if your capacity to enjoy those things or look forward to something is full, then you're completely satisfied and happy, right? So, like you said, it seems like I know in me, I'll just tell you my story, like any threat to lose that is essentially pride in me, this exalting of my own self, and assuming that I've earned anything or that I deserve anything or that I can leverage my work or whatever in such a way where I had all these good things coming to me.
Right.
So therefore, when I get them and I've achieved it, I'm no longer thankful. I only get to thank myself, which is a lonely place to be. But a child is in that place of just like looking forward, receiving these gifts, seeing them as beautiful gifts like music or art or football. We receive them as this beautiful gift from God, and all we're left with is thankfulness. Yes. As we, like you said, look up. Yes.
I'll say fascinated, you might say obsessed with this idea of a universal truth. So what's a universal truth? So if you look at religion, if you look at martial arts, if you look at commerce, when you take a broader scope of it, right? So look at it in all context, meaning you're not looking at races, you're not looking at geographies, and you're not looking at time. So remove time. You look at all of those things, you'll find some truths that stay constant within the human race. So my listeners will now roll their eyes because I bring this book up so very often, but Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, one of the best books, in my opinion, ever written. Meditations Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the world, right? He controlled more land than anyone else. And he wrote in his notebook, it's his journal. It was never a book to be published. It was never a book for anybody to read. It was
What year was this?
Oh gosh, I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
645. Don't hold me to that AD. So very long time ago. And he writes about, what does he write about?
Roman?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was the emperor of Rome.
Okay.
He writes about his bed is warm and he doesn't want to get up in the morning because the ground is cold. He writes about how he has haters, right? He writes about how there's haters, that people who don't like him, and he can't solve that. But what he can solve is being worthy of the hate, right? So don't ever do anything that you're going to have people who don't like you. You're going to have people that hate you. You can't do anything about that. But what you can do is not do anything that makes them right? Don't be a good person. They'll still dislike you. It's okay. But as long as you're a good person, it's all right. And so there's some interesting universal truths, if you will, that come out of that. Flip over to Asia for a quick second. Zen Buddhism.
Okay.
Oftentimes says the beauty of a child's mind. A child's mind is a beginner's mind. It's something that in Zen Buddhism, they focus on a lot, is having this same appreciation and gratitude that you find that we were just talking about, and specifically in the Bible. And why I say that is because whether you believe in God or you don't, doesn't really matter, because these universal truths seem to be apparent in multiple cultures, different geographies, different races, and different times throughout human history. And yet they're all consistent. They're all consistently saying the same thing through centuries of time, modern and old, that we as a species, humans, need to cultivate this honesty, this gratitude, this joyfulness, these things that in Christianity we relate to heaven and having the sort of keys to the kingdom, as it were. I believe those to be 100% true. I love when a fact has been reinforced through time and geography and religions, right? So having all of those different facets through so much time and still coming out with the same answer, that's very unique, right? That must be true if that is the case. Does that make sense?
So what it makes me think is that there's potentially this ability to recognize a path to, let's say, oneness, let's say that place of childlike joy. My journey, and we've talked about the struggle, in my experience with talking with hundreds of people about what we're tapping on the front door of here, is that most people recognize this almost impossibility of achieving it.
Yes.
And so, like, when we talk about these universal truths, I would just challenge. I might start going down some roads here that are a little bit different than your thought on this. But when you look at these universal truths that we see across all time and space, I feel like there's an explanation for that. You say different religions can carry the same truth, but the irony in it is that each one of those books of religion essentially contradict the next. So those books can't live next to each other because each one of those books are claiming that the other book is wrong. Right. So if we get down to that place of this universal truth, that there is something at the center of all creation that essentially holds the keys to all truth and logic and coherent thought.
Yes.
What is that key? I guess would be the ultimately true thing. And I think that whatever holds that key also unlocks the door to the experience of the childlikeness that we know is the path to life intellectually. Mm-hmm. But who are the people on earth that are actually walking in it would be the question, right?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, and to your point about how the books can't live side by side because they each think they've got it right and the other ones have it wrong. I would say that there's two sides to that coin, which is, I believe when you step back and look at all of the books and all of the viewpoints, you see some universal truths in them. However, each one of those books was written by man, and man has ego. And he puts things in there to protect himself and to be competitive against his fellow man. So he adds his own flavor sort of on top of those truths. And it's up to us. It's our journey. It's our responsibility to kind of dig through those and see the pieces. I like to use martial arts as a simpler way of describing this because, and let's talk about modern martial arts, UFC, right? I love watching the UFC. It's great. What you'll see is that multiple different martial art disciplines are in there. And those martial art disciplines can come from very different backgrounds all throughout the world. However, the techniques that work, the ones that are the most effective, percolate their way up to the top. All of the other ones sort of fall by the wayside. It's, as Michelangelo likes to say, I don't make the sculpture, I simply chip away the unnecessary, right? There's sort of a boiling down to that essence. It's up to the martial artist. It's up to the person that is performing that journey or on that journey that has to get down to those truths. That's part of the journey. That is the same journey that we as humans all have to go through. And I think in some ways, sort of the universal truths are there. And we have to sort of weed through some of the ego that's been wrapped up in some of these religions, actually all of the religions, if I'm being honest, to get to the sort of value in it, the meat of it. Anyway, that's just how I sort of visually think about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess the importance in believing that there is a God who has no ego.
Correct.
Because if God were to exist, he would have to be a self-sustaining, holy, unable to be imperfect in any way being. That the very words from his mouth would be the ones that we could only trust. Completely, right? So if there was ever a place on this earth where words that actually came from the living God were recorded, and we could read just them, even apart from the explaining of what he meant, if we could even just start by this idea that he spoke at one point audibly, and we could trust whatever he said, because he could never contradict himself. He could never lie. He has no ego. That would be the only assurance in starting from the right foundation. And I think I think we're all trying to climb our way to him in one way or another to find those words.
Yes.
To believe to be true.
Even if science is your God, I actually believe that, and I think I can do a pretty good job of arguing that if science is your God and science is a religion, it can't explain everything, just like religion can't explain everything. And I would argue that that is what you just said is even more true. Because if science is your God, okay, so does God believe in fairness? In the way in the Judeo-Christian version of God, does he believe in fairness? No, he does not believe in fairness. Fairness implies ego. Fairness implies ego, because what ego says is I deserve as much as the other person. That's what's fair. That's
Wait,
ego.
let me say that there. What if you flip that?
Yes, flip it.
And, flip it completely and say that if the correct version of God showing no partiality and this idea of fairness being I deserve nothing.
Yes.
And neither does any other.
Right.
So that's a different side of that coin that does not promote ego, right?
No, it does. Because that implies that he shouldn't have or she shouldn't have as much as I have because I have nothing. They don't deserve anything. I don't deserve anything. That's still fairness. That's still even. God would say, I have created. Science would say, I have created. And in by creating, I have given you free will. Again, God or science, interchangeable here. And through that, fairness is gone. There is no more fairness. There's no such thing as fairness. Fairness is a human construct, right? A bird.
Yeah, I agree with that.
They're not aware. A shark is not aware of fairness. I should get as much fish, or I don't deserve as much fish as the next shark.
Yeah. So you're talking about tears. You're talking about this idea of. So I would look at it as these gifts from God.
Yes. Where
God shows no partiality. You know, the Bible is going to claim that no man, by any of his efforts, has the ability to reach God. Mm-hmm. His only ability to reach God is to believe. So I believe in justification by faith. This idea that your righteousness is only due to your heart believing that your Creator is good.
Right. So
therefore, the reason why your justification happened is because you exalted Him with your faith versus you exalting yourself with your work. So there's this idea that no matter who you are as a human, you come by way of a cross that says that God loved me that much. I'm putting my faith in that. Mm-hmm. I'm exalting His love, not my love.
Right.
And then, but as our experience, there's this idea of tears. You know, there's no authority given to you except that which is from above. That there is goodness in tears of authority. It is okay for one man to have more money than another person. There's nothing intrinsically evil about that.
Correct.
So I think we're looking at two different sides of fairness. Yep. You could correct me. There's this on earthly version of fairness that I think is a social construct that doesn't hold weight. But then there's this idea as before God, showing partiality. I think I was talking about the latter. Yes. And you were talking about the first, right?
No, I fully agree. So it is just a unique way that both the God above us and the God of science, which one you choose.
Which I would believe they're welded together, and we can expound on that.
I fully subscribe to that, actually. But what's interesting that you point out is the gratitude that you experience as a human towards these things around, the miracles around you, is what invokes happiness and joy and satisfaction and all of these great things. Now, if you believe in creationism, that God created everything, He created the snow that fell on the pine branch that we talked about, and how each and every snowflake is different from the last, that's amazing. Now, if you believe in science, it's still the same miracle. It's still a miracle that you were even born, because you're 1 in a billion chance of even being born as a human being on this earth. That snowflake being one of billions that's unlike any other. the miracle hasn't changed at all, regardless of which God, quote unquote, you believe in, science or him. So I really find that kind of interesting, going back to the universal truth, right? It is no less a miracle, regardless of who you, quote unquote, believe in, God himself or the God of science. The miracle remains constant. The gratitude, the spectacle, the wonder of those things still remains true. Doesn't change it at all. I find that really fascinating. There's something, I don't know what's there. Look, I'm not a theologian, but there's something there. And sort of the thought exercise, both emotionally and mentally, of kind of playing devil's advocate to your own points, only will, in my opinion, only reinforces exactly what we're talking about. You just go, wow, that is true. Even if I flip it on its head, even if I look on the other side of the coin.
So if you just I don't know that I agree with everything that I heard there, but in part, I see the connection being made. The one versus the other, say we're made in the image of God. Let us make man in our image. If we had the ability for, in our experience today, for myself to create we'll just say this, my daughter. Okay. So there's a idea of creation in making a baby, right? She's born to us, and say hypothetically, a tree could have a human baby. I see the difference in science being an explosion for creating the earth and therefore me, and then my connection to that God, which is science, being an equivalent to being born as of a tree, and then trying to relate with that tree for the rest of my life. And the idea of being created in the image of God, once I find my creator, I have this ability to dance with him. I have this ability to sing with him. I have this ability to use the very words that he used to create me. Now my thankfulness is complete. And I would argue all the way back to our original point of being suicide and these lacks of ability to understand where we came from, this needing to be a part of a family, is directly and intrinsically connected to this need to know that what created me and started me is in some way like me.
Yes.
And that is what gives me worth for living. And I personally had to, because the suicidal side, we can go down, you were talking about wanting to go to this low point, is something that I experienced at the utmost at a certain part of my life. And if I would have put any weight on evolution, I probably would have went through with it. And the ability to know that who created me is more than just matter. He's morally good. He is actually loving and intensely personal. My life, I would argue, would be redeemed from the pit. And I'm not arguing this in any way to be right. I'm arguing this because I have been in the battle. And if there by any chance is anyone within, hearing my voice right now that needs to know that there is a actual man in heaven that cares more about them than they care about themselves, I believe it's essential to some people's life currently. And that's the only reason why I push to make that clarity of what I believe, is because I care about my fellow man. It's not in any way because I respect your opinion. I respect what has led you there in the study with that. But I felt led to make that distinction.
I agree with you, and I'll add to it to sort of reinforce your point, which is to say that children who go through a separation of sorts from their parents, right, either through divorce or death or what have you, oftentimes experience more depression, more
Right. I
loneliness,
agree.
lack of direction, right? So yeah, yes, and I fully agree with what you're saying, and there's a lot of evidence that shows that you're exactly correct. But let's not move off that suicide point, because from an outsider looking in, it looks like, okay, this kid was born, he's got a cool family, they handed him a guitar, he's naturally gifted, he's Johnny Cash by 16, he's got a hit record by 21. Life is easy. It's a straight line for this guy.
Mm-mm.
But that's not true.
Mm-mm.
And so I really am excited for you. Excited is the wrong word, but I really want to dig into that moment of what brought you to that
Yeah.
dark time. How did you get there?
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I know that I share the very experience I'm getting ready to share with you. I share it with a lot of people. But I don't know that everyone's experience of their low point was exactly triggered by what I think mine was triggered by. Ultimately, I spend my whole life in Rockford, Illinois. Get this call, I think it's 17 years old, from a guy named Billy Lawson to move to Nashville. We go down. I'm leaving family behind, leaving a girlfriend behind, trying to learn really who I am, and move to town. And there's like two simultaneous things happening. I told you, fear of the future, fear of the unknown, fear of losing my love for music, but for doing it for the wrong reasons. I've seen too many people, and I was around more people when I moved to Nashville that maybe lost their original love for it and was strictly doing it to get the paycheck. And that was the very thing that was robbing them of it. So it got me really internally thinking about, do I want to go down this path or not?
Sure.
And being introspective, there was just this moment. This was, I'll tell you, my lowest point in life was not right before I had things going for me, but actually a little while after I had the first sparks and things started to happen. I had a confusing time before things really got to get moving. But the lowest point was probably, I had been with Universal. I made a record. They dropped it. I went through a year and a half looking for another record label that would pick me up. I was writing songs. Curb Records picked me up. We made another record that didn't show, or a half of a record that didn't end up showing up. It didn't meet the standards of myself or the label. And then I ended up working with Tony Brown, who produced George Strait. We talked about him on the beginning. And ended up being able to be on the Grand Ole Opry, do some amazing things. The night after I got to play the Grand Ole Opry for the first time, I went home, and my parents had to leave town. I was still staying with my parents at the time. I went home, and I had to take the garbage out. And this overwhelming sense of me being finite and still being human, no matter what I could ever achieve on this earth, overwhelmed me. And I've heard this experience from multiple people. I listen to people that, win multiple Super Bowls, or the fastest runners on the planet. They're driven by this idea: if I could only be successful enough, I'll be happy. Well, I would say, luckily, felt that early on, because the idea of playing the Opry for the first time was this pinnacle moment. Of course. But it didn't satisfy, and it didn't change the way I felt about myself. So taking the garbage out, I'm overwhelmed with this emotional sense of my finiteness. And I was directly in that moment connecting it to God, and somehow connecting it to morality.
Mm.
And I guess every moral failure, I think we'd all be liars if we didn't claim that we have morally
Of course.
failed one another, let alone God, um, crushed me. I mean, absolutely, the gauntlet came down, and then my lowest points really was not connected to, am I going to be successful? And I got to push through this in order to be successful one day. But it was more the fact that no matter how successful I am, it will never get rid of this feeling that
Right.
I'm feeling right now. And it will never atone for the moral failures that I've done in the past.
Hmm.
And so that drove me. What I think that was is a consciousness, a conscious reality of a creator and him having to be moral, morally perfect. And my stance against a morally perfect God would just shine light on my imperfection.
Mm.
And I guess the reason why you're going to find me leaning towards a Judeo-Christian worldview is that I believe that I found to the uttermost complete rest and satisfaction and the eradication of those inadequate feelings through salvation in
Hmm.
Jesus Christ. And it's not that I don't struggle, but there has never been there has been a complete healing from what I've described, that has then borne fruit in my life, in my art, in it really every single area of my life. It is now affected by the faith moment that happened at, I think I was 20 years old, and I've never been the same. And I shudder at who I would have been at this point had that not happened then.
Mm. Right.
Because I was on a really dangerous path, I believe. And I'm just, by God's grace, believe that I was kind of plucked off that path and put on another.
Did you tell your parents? Did you tell your girlfriend at the time? What?
Yeah, I wasn't dating anyone at the time. I think a lot of my fears was how I had hurt my girlfriend. We weren't dating, and I had dated her for a long time, and just leaving town and making promises, and then I move out of town, and it looked like this wasn't going to work. So I broke up with her, and just that whole thing bothered me a lot. I did tell my parents. And this was over actually an extended period of time. And I say that I didn't get saved that night, so to speak, but that feeling of inadequacy and moral failure actually carried for a few weeks, and it was to a really unhealthy point where I was so aware of it. My conscience was so ablaze. I didn't eat or sleep for probably a week and a half.
Wow.
And I just wrestled. I read a Bible. I wrestled in prayer. I wrestled in multiple things. And I actually, in the middle of that, just out of fear of what I could become, I had some people in my life that were, I would claim to be extremely evil people that didn't necessarily hurt me, but I watched people hurt other people that I knew tremendously. And if I couldn't find something outside of myself to save me, I was crippled with this fear that I could become completely like that one day.
Yes.
And so my thoughts of suicide and things were like down that path came from this really demonic lie that if you were to harm yourself, that would ensure that you wouldn't harm another person, which I think that's straight from Satan, because ironically I would be hurting my parents,
Right.
I would be hurting everyone around
Right.
me by making that decision. So
Right.
So the need to find not only forgiveness but a power to be set on a new path was essential to my life.
Yep.
And I'm thankful that it was, because if I had lived a life where I assumed that I was strong enough to push back every temptation, to push back every dark side of this world, I probably would have been apt to walk in my own pride and self-sustaining power. And I see that in myself. That would have been a dangerous way to walk, because that's the way I'd walked my first 20 years and proved that I was walking in darkness. So I know that's kind of heavy, but if we're going to talk around suicide, I recognize that you're open to the heavy stuff. And I think we need to, because there's an insane amount of people that are believing the exact same lie that I believed.
Yep.
And that's why, I find incredible purpose in not only playing music, but I hope that all my music and every interview and every time someone sees me hug my wife or whatever that might be, is a parable to a greater story that will lead people to water that will never make them thirsty again. Because that's been my experience.
That is incredibly beautiful. And I really appreciate you being candid. And I hope that people listen to this and find more than inspiration. Inspiration is beautiful, but I hope they find a path like, hey, I'm not alone, connection.
Yeah.
This person found a way out. And they've now on a much more, I hate using the word successful, because unfortunately when we say successful, people instantly think about money.
Material thing, right? But I would say that was success. That battle over my life was success.
Yes, that is success. That's real success, because no amount of money can bring you back from the dead, right?
Right, exactly.
So yeah, real success is that. So I hope that people listen to that and go, oh, I'm not alone. Look at him. He's achieved all these things, and yet he has had the same struggles as me. And then there's something profound about connecting with people like that. So I really appreciate you sharing, and the fact that it didn't happen overnight. It took weeks, if not months and months, to kind of marinate in it and chew on it and discover or find yourself, if you will, to get out of that path. And this is in the midst of success. Music success, that is, right?
Right.
And then that's really important for people to know that does happen to a lot of the folks that we've had on this show. So funny enough. So, okay.
But we feel insecure or are pressured to not show it on our social medias because, we're perfect. And if we weren't perfect, maybe they wouldn't buy into our story.
Right. It's 100% true. So now we're cruising, we're 20, we're cruising towards 25.
Right. That's during, I think my radio, or towards the end of my radio tour, releasing the first album. I've been out on the road. Yeah. I mean, I would say maybe 23, 20. I guess it was 23 when that first album came out, and I was really traveling, getting married. Starting to date my now wife, who I had met at a bluegrass festival when I was a little bit younger. She had the exact experience that I just talked about, not to the lowest of lows that I talked about, but she also had this experience of this idea of being born again and feeling loved by her creator for the first time. So she was set on this new path of wanting to learn who she was again, what her purpose was on this earth, because she felt like she had been living in a deceived way and had no real purpose apart from whatever I wanted to do. And so her and I sharing that view while I was on my radio tour, my first radio tour, and us being friends. We were just friends before we ever started dating. Her and I would just be on the phone while I was in my hotel room all the time, just talking about life and what was to come, and all that we were learning, how thankful we were that we dodged the bullet, so to speak, and the things that we talked about. And And then the career just started to take off in some ways, against my wishes. I was in a place where just, again, still kind of afraid of losing my path by doing it for the wrong reasons. And so I applied myself to my art, but I still, to this day, I don't like self-promotion. I don't like things that draw attention to myself as much as I like people being drawn to the art that I've created. Right. So I like saying I like saying me and the band make music. I like being a part of a group and not being the central point.
Yep.
And that was really strange for radio people, for the label, and this avoidance of self-promotion with this overwhelming love for music. And I see my mission now as just being, I want to compel other people to see music as beautiful as I think it is. And so let's celebrate something outside of myself. And let's look at music together, whether I'm singing an old country song from the past or something that I have written with a friend. I just have this desire to celebrate music with other people. But the journey for the first record was what we talked about, 3 songs on the radio. I think 2 of them were close to the top 10 on certain charts. I think Billboard charts, the highest we got was like in the 30s. But there were other charts that we climbed high on, which was cool. Just making music and going along. And we're on record 2 now, but we can get to that. But during that time, I was getting married, or getting ready to get married, promoting this album, and then, learning how to be human.
Yes, I like that. So let's give people where you are today, where people can follow you. When's the next album coming out? Give us a little update on Mo Pitney today.
So it's really cool. We have a whole album in the can, but 5, I believe 5. I can't ever tell because we have so many things in the chute getting ready to release. I think 5 of the songs off the album are already released to iTunes and Spotify. And we are planning in the next month to push a single to radio again, which is really exciting. And then by the end of April, you can pre-order the full album now. And by the end of April, you'll be able to receive the album. I think it's April 22nd. So it's exciting to have it in the can along with the album. We have multiple music videos. And we also have a flood of content that kind of connects to a lot of what we've talked about today about life. I've got hours of content of my hometown, traveling on the road, life, buying our bus, going through, this entire career that is going to be simultaneously released in different platforms while we unroll the album. So I wanted people to be more connected to my life and my story, therefore further understanding why I'm singing what I'm singing, because I feel very connected to the songs I'm singing about. And I want to prove that by kind of showing my life in every part of it.
Well, that's how you know you're going to be successful, right? For those specific reasons. You would do it if you weren't getting paid a nickel. That's
right.
By far reason number 1. And 2, it comes from a genuine place of just honesty.
Yeah.
So
good.
Good. Blessings to you, man, because I know that is the recipe for success, because I've interviewed enough people to see that truthism is true, whether you're an NFL star, a rap star, race car driver, you name it. That is the path to victory, which is really funny and ironic that not chasing fame, money, and success and materialism oftentimes is what gets you there. I always think that is just God's little way of kind of smirking at us, right?
Right. Anytime we try to control anything, we break it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of that will be links in the show notes down below.
Great. I appreciate that.
This has been amazing, man. This is a really deep, great conversation. I love this. I know our listeners got a lot out of it.
Hey, I appreciate you having a platform that doesn't shame either side to open up and talk about what they believe. I'm fearful that we live in a culture that will shame if you don't adopt the majority thought process. And so I really, really appreciate the ability for us to volley back and forth ideas and not feel shame just that we've had a thought.
Yes.
I don't think there's any revelation of truth apart from that. Yes. And I think we all have a lot of question marks over our heads because of all that's gone down. I think we deserve it. Do we deserve to be able to do what we're doing now and just try to find out what we believe and why we believe it, and let's encourage one another on our journey to do that.
I fully subscribe to that. So much so that this will sound like a shameless plug, but I don't mean it that way. I built this platform specifically to share those messages, and I don't monetize it in any way, shape, or form. I don't allow advertisers. I don't sell any products, nothing. It is 100% out of my pocket. I lose money on every episode, very much on purpose, because I don't want anyone to be able to question my authenticity as to why we do it.
Right. Well, right. I appreciate that very much. And I sense that from your accounts. And that's why I was so excited to be a part of it.
Awesome, man. This has been really fantastic. Well, Pitney, everybody, thank you. You're a legend. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. God bless you all.
God bless you. I will see you soon, Mom. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.